He walked back onto the CMA stage carrying a guitar, and the weight of a life the world never truly knew. A broken marriage, a storm of rumors, a misunderstood performance, and the childhood wounds he spent decades trying to outrun. This is not the story of a country legend. This is the story of a man who lost everything he thought he belonged to and had to face the one truth he had avoided his entire life. What really happened to Keith Urban, and why did his comeback shake the world in silence? When Keith Urban walked onto the CMA Awards stage after months of silence, he carried a weight that was heavy in a way most people could not see. This was the stage that helped make him a star, the place where he had celebrated many victories, shared unforgettable performances, and connected with millions of fans. But on this night, something felt different from the moment his boots touched the floor. The applause did not rise with the usual excitement. It did not have the same warm energy he had felt for years. Instead, it felt unsure, slow, and strangely careful, like people were trying to decide how they should react before reacting at all. It was the kind of applause that made a person feel watched, not welcomed. Keith had been away from the spotlight for a while, and during that time, his personal life had gone through a painful and public change. His divorce from Nicole Kidman had shocked fans and created a wave of speculation. People talked more about the breakup than about his music. Then came the rumors that spread across social media like wildfire, especially those about another woman. Articles, posts, and comments kept repeating the same questions, the same doubts, and the same accusations. Even people who had followed his career for decades were suddenly unsure about what to believe. Just when the dust should have settled, a new issue rose even louder. His performance at Mar-a-Lago days before the CMAs became another source of noise. It was a private event, arranged by an Australian billionaire, but the public did not focus on the details. They focused on the location and on the political meaning they attached to it. Some people quickly judged him, some mocked him, and others accused him of taking a political side he never said he supported. Within hours, the internet created a whole story around his appearance there, and those stories built more pressure on his return to the CMA stage. This meant that when he stepped into the spotlight at the CMAs, he was not just walking into a performance, he was walking into a room full of expectations, opinions, doubts, and silent questions. The audience did not look at him the way they used to. They did not see only the singer, the songwriter, or the performer they had admired for years. Many were looking at him as a man who had recently been part of controversies, someone whose life had been in the news for reasons that had nothing to do with music. Instead of hearing his voice first, they seemed to be listening to everything that had been said about him over the last few weeks. Keith felt this shift the moment he looked at the crowd. Even though he had performed in front of thousands of people many times, this night felt uncomfortable. He could sense that some people were unsure whether they should celebrate his return or judge it. Some were waiting to see if he would address the rumors, while others expected him to prove something. That tension filled the space between him and the audience. It was not loud, but it was clear, and it shaped the atmosphere of his performance more than any lighting or stage effect could. He held his guitar as he always did, but the comfort it normally gave him felt a little distant. The stage, which once felt like home, now felt unfamiliar. Every movement seemed heavier, every breath more noticeable. Even though he began singing with the same voice he had always used, he could tell that people were not just hearing the music, they were trying to interpret the person behind it. Every pause, every expression, every shift in tone was being watched closely. The applause after the first notes did not erase the tension. It almost made it more obvious. It reminded him that he was not being welcomed back as a hero, but examined like someone standing in front of a jury. The separation from Nicole had hurt him privately, but it also changed how people saw him publicly. Their marriage had been admired for so long that its end became a topic for endless discussion. It created space for rumors to grow, some true, some exaggerated, and many completely invented. Then, performing at Mar-a-Lago, followed by people online reacting in extreme ways, added more confusion to the picture. These events combined created a version of Keith Urban that did not match who he felt he really was. On that stage, the uninvited guest was everything the world had been saying about him. It stood beside him like a shadow he could not shake off. It showed up in the hesitations in the crowd, in the careful clapping, in the long stares that lasted a moment too long. Even those who still supported him seemed unsure of what might happen next. It was as if the music, his greatest strength, was fighting against a wall of outside noise. He continued singing because that was the only thing he could do. Music had always been the place where he found clarity when life became confusing. But even that refuge felt shaken now. He had hoped that stepping on stage would help him return to himself, that the energy of performing live would pull him out of the storm swirling around him. Instead, he realized that the storm had followed him all the way to the microphone. The tension between how the world saw him and who he knew himself to be had never felt this strong. The public had formed opinions based on headlines and short videos. Social media had created quick judgments, spreading them faster than truth could move. Yet, Keith stood there as a real person, not a rumor or a headline. He was a man dealing with heartbreak, stress, and emotional pressure, trying to do the one thing he always loved: perform. The audience was not hostile, but they were not fully embracing him either. They were waiting, they were observing, and Keith felt suspended between his history and his present, unsure which version of him they were expecting to see. He knew that the only way forward was to continue singing and hope that the music would speak louder than the noise around him. But before the world judged the man Keith Urban became, it is necessary to understand the boy he once was and the wounds he never outran. Keith Urban's childhood in New Zealand was nothing like the world he would one day enter. He was born into a home that was full of responsibility and tension. His father struggled with alcohol, and the effects of it touched every part of the family's life. Some days were calm, but many days felt heavy. His mother worked long hours and carried the weight of keeping the family together. She tried to keep things stable, but it was difficult when she was tired and stressed almost every day. The atmosphere in the house shaped Keith early. It was not a place filled with constant fighting, but it was a place where he always felt the pressure in the air. As a young boy, he learned to notice when things were about to go wrong and when he needed to stay quiet. Silence became a part of his life, in a way most children never experience. It was sometimes a safe place where he could hide from the tension. At other times, it was painful, because it reminded him of everything he could not control. He learned to stay in the corners of rooms, listening to the sounds of his parents trying to manage their struggles. He grew up learning the difference between the kind of silence that keeps you safe and the kind that makes you feel alone. This shaped how he reacted to problems later in life, because he learned early that silence could protect him, but it could also hurt him. School did not make life easier. Instead of being a place where he could escape the difficulty at home, it added to it. Keith was mocked by other children for things he could not change. His accent made him stand out, and his appearance made him an easy target for cruel jokes. Some kids pushed him around, while others ignored him completely. He often felt like he did not fit anywhere, not in his house and not in school. The bullying made him feel different, and that feeling stayed with him for a long time. He became more shy and more withdrawn, trying to stay unnoticed to avoid being picked on. Even though the world around him felt heavy, something inside him stayed hopeful. That small hope was the idea that there had to be something better than what he was living through. When his parents gave him a used guitar, they did not know how much that moment would change his life. The guitar was old and scratched, and it was not something that looked special from the outside. But to Keith, it felt like a door opening. It gave him something he could hold, something that belonged only to him. It was the first time he felt he had a tool that could help him escape the heavy feelings he carried. Keith started playing the guitar the way some children play sports or games, but for him, it was not about fun. It was about finding a place where he could breathe. He sat for hours trying to make sense of the sounds. Sometimes the strings cut into his fingers until they were sore and bleeding, but he did not stop. He kept going because it made him feel alive in a way nothing else did. Over time, the guitar became more than an object. It became his identity, the thing that made him feel safe, seen, and understood. When he played, he did not feel bullied. He did not feel alone. The music gave him peace, even if only for a few minutes at a time. His parents noticed how much the guitar meant to him. Even though they had their own struggles, they supported his interest in music as much as they could. By the age of 9, Keith began entering small music competitions in the area. These were not fancy events. Most were simple gatherings where people barely looked at the stage unless something shocked them. When Keith walked up to perform, he was just a quiet little boy with a guitar, and many people did not pay close attention. But for Keith, it did not matter if the audience cared. What mattered was how he felt while standing there. The moment he started to play, something inside him clicked. He felt confident, strong, and free. Those early competitions may not have brought him fame or praise, but they planted something important. They showed him that he had a way to express himself that did not depend on anyone else's approval. They gave him a sense of control he never had at home or at school. Each performance helped him build a small piece of inner strength. Without knowing it, he was building the emotional foundation that would carry him through his future career. Even as a child, Keith had a deep sense of longing. It was the longing to belong somewhere, to feel safe, and to feel understood. This longing was not a temporary feeling. It became part of him. He also developed a sensitivity that came from watching his parents struggle and from feeling the pain of being bullied. These experiences made him more aware of emotions, both his own and others. This sensitivity helped him later as a songwriter, because he could express feelings in a way that touched people. But the same sensitivity also made life harder when things went wrong. The wounds from his childhood did not disappear when he grew older. They followed him into his teenage years, into his early career, and even into his successes. They influenced his choices, his relationships, and his reactions to stress. They created a pattern of feeling like an outsider, even when he was surrounded by people. These early years created both his strength and his weaknesses. They gave him the passion that drove him, but also the emotional weight he carried for decades. Music became the one thing that helped him manage all of this. Without the guitar, he might have drowned in silence and loneliness. With it, he found something that helped him keep going. The boy who sat in a small New Zealand home, playing until his fingers hurt, was already preparing for the life he would have later. The seeds of his future struggles, successes, and conflicts were planted in those early years. But the boy who could barely breathe without his guitar would soon learn that dreams demand sacrifice, and the price would be everything. When Keith Urban left school at 15, he did not make the decision lightly. He knew it would shock people, and he knew it was risky. Most kids his age were still figuring out what subjects they liked, but Keith already understood something about himself. School was not helping him become who he wanted to be. The environment did not support his passion, and he did not feel like he belonged. Music was the only thing that made sense to him, and he felt that staying in school would only slow him down. Even though he was young, he believed that if he did not follow his dream now, he might lose it forever. Leaving school was his first major step into a life that would be full of uncertain paths. After dropping out, he moved to Australia with almost nothing. He carried a guitar case, a few clothes, and the hope that he could build a better life through music. He did not have a real plan or financial backup. He simply believed that Australia offered more opportunities than his small town in New Zealand. When he arrived there, the reality was harsh. The dream sounded exciting, but the journey was difficult from the start. He did not have money to live comfortably, and he did not know many people who could help him. He had to accept whatever work he could find. Keith began playing in smoky pubs, at weddings, and at small festivals. Many of these places were loud, chaotic, and not interested in listening to a young musician with big dreams. People talked over his performances, ignored him, or even dismissed him because he was just a kid. Some nights he earned a little money, but many nights he earned nothing at all. Sometimes the food he ate depended on whether someone paid him after a show. He slept on couches when friends offered, and when they didn't, he found whatever space he could manage. He learned how to survive on almost nothing. Even though these conditions were rough, Keith did not complain. Instead, he worked harder. He practiced every night, sometimes until morning, pushing himself to improve. He believed that if he kept playing, someone would eventually notice him. He focused on making his guitar sound cleaner and sharper than other players. He paid attention to tone, phrasing, and precision. He worked on small details that other musicians might ignore. This dedication started to show in his performances. People began to recognize the quality of his playing, even if the crowds were small. Slowly, he gained respect in the Australian music scene. It did not happen overnight, but year by year, more musicians noticed him. Those who had doubted him earlier began to admit that he had something special. Producers started to reach out, and local artists wanted him to collaborate with them. His reputation grew because he was consistent, reliable, and serious about his craft. Even though he was young, people started trusting his skills. He became known as a guitarist who could deliver clean, emotional, and precise playing in any setting. But as Keith built this reputation, he also learned another truth. Ambition can be brutal. It demands effort every single day, even when you're tired, lonely, or unsure. Some nights he would go home exhausted, wondering if he was strong enough to keep pushing. He often questioned if he was good enough, or if he was wasting time chasing something impossible. Confidence and fear existed together inside him, fighting for control. One day, he would feel proud of his progress. The next day, he would feel like he was failing. That emotional battle became a big part of his growth. His hunger for success was not only about fame, it was about finding a place where he felt he truly belonged. Australia was better than New Zealand in terms of opportunities, but it still felt limited. The local music scene was strong, but it did not match Keith's dreams. He admired American country music deeply, and he knew that Nashville was the heart of it. Every time he listened to the artists he loved, he felt that his real path was waiting there. He understood that no matter how successful he became in Australia, it would never be enough to satisfy the dream he carried since childhood. Still, before he could think about Nashville seriously, he had to build himself up. Australia became his training ground. It taught him discipline, resilience, and patience. It taught him how to survive in a world that did not care whether he succeeded or failed. It showed him that talent was not enough, and that he needed to be stronger than his doubts. All the nights he spent rehearsing until his hands hurt, all the days he performed in places where people barely noticed him, helped shape the musician he would one day become. Keith also learned that success is not always loud. Sometimes it grows quietly in the background through small victories. A compliment from a well-known musician meant more to him than money. A producer calling him back after a show gave him hope. Hearing people say that his guitar tone was different from others made him feel that he was on the right path. These moments helped him keep going during the hardest times. As the years passed, Keith reached a point where he knew Australia could not give him what he wanted next. He had grown as much as he could there. He had sharpened his skills, built confidence, and proven to himself that he was capable. But the dream that started in his childhood, the dream of standing among the greats, was still far away. Nashville became more than a destination. It became a symbol of everything he hoped to achieve. He knew that if he wanted to push himself further, he had to go where the best country musicians in the world lived and worked. He understood that this move would not be easy. It would require leaving behind whatever stability he had built in Australia. It would mean stepping into a place where he would be a complete unknown again. But Keith believed that dreams required the courage to take risks. His entire journey so far had prepared him for the next step. But when he finally reached Nashville, the holy land of country music, he discovered that legends aren't born there. They are crushed and rebuilt. When Keith Urban arrived in Nashville, he brought with him a level of hope that only someone who has chased a dream for most of their life can understand. He thought that Nashville would feel welcoming the moment he stepped in, because he had imagined it for years. It was the place he believed he belonged, the city where the artists he grew up admiring had built their lives. But the reality he met was much harder than he ever expected. Nashville was full of talented people, all fighting for the same opportunities. The city did not slow down for anyone, and it did not make room just because someone arrived with passion. Keith realized quickly that dreams did not impress anyone here. Only results did. He started performing in tiny venues where the audience was often smaller than the number of people working backstage. Sometimes only a handful of people were sitting in the room, and many of them were not even listening. He went to auditions where he was politely thanked and then dismissed before he could finish a full song. He met with record labels that showed no interest in signing him. Most of them already had their chosen artists, and a young man from New Zealand did not fit what they were looking for. Even when someone complimented his guitar skills, it rarely went further than that. Life became a struggle as his money began to run out. Keith could not afford a proper place to live, so he often slept in his car. He kept his guitar in the front seat and tried to rest in the back seat whenever he could. Winters were cold, and he would wake up numb from the low temperatures. Some days he washed up in public restrooms before heading to gigs. He took any job he could find related to music because he refused to give up. He performed in bars, gave lessons, played background parts for other artists, and accepted work that paid very little just so he could survive and stay close to the Nashville scene. Even while struggling, Keith kept studying. He knew that being talented was not enough in a city where thousands of people were talented. He spent hours trying to understand how songs worked emotionally. He was interested in the machinery of feeling, how a melody, a lyric, or even a pause could make someone react. He paid attention to how the great country artists told stories, how they expressed pain, hope, or love. He wanted to learn how to move people with music in a way that felt real and honest. He treated this like an education, even though he couldn't afford formal training. Slowly, things began to shift. A few producers noticed that Keith's guitar playing had something different in it, something clean, expressive, and controlled. They liked that he could play with precision without losing emotion. He started getting invited to small studio sessions. These opportunities were not big breaks, but they were signs that people were beginning to take him seriously. For the first time since arriving in Nashville, he felt that he was not completely invisible. As his network grew, Keith began writing more songs and improving his voice. He still faced a lot of rejection, but he also experienced moments of encouragement that helped him keep going. Some musicians he met respected his dedication and started recommending him for projects. He gained traction slowly, like a seed finally taking root in difficult soil. Even though progress was slow, it was progress. It made him feel like his struggle had meaning. The turning point came with the creation of his self-titled album in 1999. This album was the product of years of work, pain, lessons, and growth. The song, "But for the Grace of God," became the centerpiece of the album and the moment that changed everything. When the song was released, people across America started recognizing his voice. The honesty in the lyrics and the warmth in his performance connected with listeners in a powerful way. Radio stations began playing it more and more, and people who had never heard of him before began searching for his music. For the first time, Keith felt like America saw him not as a foreign newcomer, but as a musician worth paying attention to. His sound stood out, and listeners appreciated that he had something real to offer. The album reached audiences far beyond Nashville, and his name started appearing in conversations about promising new country artists. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. After years of rejection and nights spent in his car, he finally felt that he was stepping into the world he had dreamed about since childhood. Being an outsider had shaped him in many ways. It made him work harder, stay humble, and keep his focus on the music rather than the fame. When America finally embraced him, he did not feel like a lucky guest. He felt like someone who had earned his place. The acceptance he received was not about trends or hype. It came because people connected with the emotions in his songs. They heard the story of a man who had suffered, tried, failed, and kept going. That honesty made people trust him as an artist. This new sense of belonging changed him emotionally. For the first time in his life, he felt that he was exactly where he was meant to be. He felt understood in a way he had not felt in New Zealand or Australia. Nashville no longer felt like a closed door. It became a place where his efforts were finally recognized. His confidence grew stronger, not because he thought he was better than others, but because he realized his voice mattered. He was no longer just a boy who ran away from home with a guitar. He had become a rising voice in country music, someone who could shape the future of the genre. But every rise casts a shadow, and one day, those shadows would return for him with a vengeance. When Keith Urban's career finally took off in America, it happened with a speed and force that surprised even him. For years, he had struggled just to be noticed, but suddenly he became one of the brightest names in modern country music. His songs started climbing the charts, his radio presence became strong, and his talent was finally being recognized on a national level. Somebody Like You, Days Go By, and You'll Think of Me became huge hits and helped shape a new era of country sound. These songs connected with millions because they carried both joy and sadness, hope and regret. People felt like Keith could express emotions that many had trouble putting into words. His voice had truth in it, and listeners trusted that. As his fame grew, Keith developed a reputation that was different from most stars. People called him the gentle outlaw, someone who looked like a rebel but carried a soft heart. He also became known as the poet of quiet heartbreak because his songs often spoke about pain in a calm, honest way. He did not shout his emotions. He shared them carefully and sincerely. Fans felt close to him, even if they had never met him. They believed that behind the loud concerts and bright lights, there was a man who truly understood love, loss, and longing. During one of the strongest periods of his rising career, Keith met Nicole Kidman. The meeting felt like a new chapter, both in his life and in his image. Nicole was already an international star, respected for her acting and admired for her elegance. She carried a calm and graceful presence, and people around the world looked at her with admiration. When she and Keith came together, the public saw it as something magical. Their relationship seemed gentle, warm, and deeply connected. The moment they became a couple, their story turned into something the media loved. When they married, it became a global fantasy. People loved the idea of a Hollywood actress and a country musician finding love together. Their marriage created a picture that looked perfect from the outside. Interviews, photos, and appearances showed two people who supported each other and enjoyed being together. For fans, it felt like Keith's tough past finally had a happy ending. For Keith, being with Nicole brought comfort, stability, and love. He understood the entertainment world better than anyone, and she supported him as he continued building his career. Together, they became a couple that people admired and talked about constantly. At the same time, Keith's professional life became more demanding. He toured non-stop, sometimes performing over 100 shows in a single year, traveling from city to city, staying in hotels, dealing with interviews, rehearsals, and long flights became part of his everyday routine. Even though he loved performing, the lifestyle took a toll on him emotionally and physically. Being on the road for months meant being away from home and away from the person he loved. It also meant constantly giving energy to crowds, even on days when he felt drained or overwhelmed. As his fame increased, parasocial expectations also grew. Fans wanted him to be the perfect artist with the perfect personality. The public wanted him to be a flawless husband who never made mistakes. Everyone expected him to keep delivering hit after hit without slowing down. Being put on this type of pedestal created pressure he had never experienced before. While the world saw an accomplished star, Keith sometimes felt like he was barely holding everything together. The combination of long touring schedules and high expectations built a heavy emotional burden. During this time, old struggles that he thought he had left behind began to resurface. Keith had fought with alcohol in the past, but the stress of fame and constant travel made those struggles return. At first, it happened quietly and slowly, but the problem grew, and soon it started affecting both his personal and professional life. He tried to manage it, but addiction is not something that disappears just because someone is successful. It followed him, even in moments when everything seemed perfect on the outside. Nicole stood by him through all of this. She supported him during relapses, encouraged him to seek help, and stayed close during the hardest moments. Their love was real, and she showed patience during times when he was lost in his own battles. She tried to help him stay grounded and healthy, and she believed that he could overcome the challenges he faced. Despite her support, Keith still struggled internally. Addiction is not only about behavior, it is connected to deep emotions, fears, and old wounds. Those early wounds from his childhood never fully left him, and they sometimes pushed him into dark moments. Even during his biggest successes, Keith often felt a sense of loneliness that he could not fully explain. Performing for thousands of people did not remove the feeling. Winning awards and being admired did not erase the inner conflict he carried. Fame gave him opportunities, recognition, and a powerful platform, but it did not fix the emotional issues that had shaped him since childhood. He was living the life many people dreamed of, but he also lived with pressure, insecurity, and personal struggles that the public could not see. The internal battle between the successful artist and the wounded person behind the spotlight became a constant part of his life. Some days he felt strong and confident, other days he felt overwhelmed and tired. Even with love, support, and success, there were moments when he felt lost. Fame made him visible to the world, but it also made him feel exposed, judged, and misunderstood. The pressure to be perfect, both as an artist and as a husband, added weight to his emotional load. The truth is that Keith Urban had reached a place most musicians only dream of. He had fame, love, admiration, and a powerful career. But even in the middle of all this success, he was fighting hidden battles that few people knew about. The life that looked perfect from the outside had cracks that were slowly widening. He was trying to balance the demands of his career with the expectations of being a public figure and the responsibilities of being a husband. All of these pressures built up over time. But even fairy tales end, and when his did, the world rushed in to watch it break. The strain of constant touring slowly began to affect Keith Urban's life in ways he could no longer ignore. Being on the road for most of the year meant long stretches away from Nicole and the routines that kept their relationship steady. At first, they tried to make it work the way many couples in the entertainment world do. They talked between shows, visited each other when schedules allowed, and supported one another's careers. But as the years went by, the emotional distance between them grew. Touring demanded all of Keith's energy. By the time he came home, he was often exhausted, overwhelmed, and trying to recover before leaving again. What used to feel exciting started to feel like something that pulled him away from the life he wanted to protect. During this period of tension, whispers began spreading about Keith and guitarist Maggie Bay. Some people who barely knew either of them began sharing stories online, twisting small interactions into big accusations. The public perception quickly grew out of control. To many fans, rumors soon felt like facts, even though there was no proof, and even though the truth was far more complex. Keith felt frustrated that people were creating their own version of his life, and Nicole felt hurt that her marriage was being discussed by strangers who knew nothing about what was happening inside their home. Whether the rumors were true or not, the damage they caused was real. They brought doubt, insecurity, and sorrow into a relationship that was already struggling under the weight of distance and pressure. Nicole's sadness became harder to hide. She had supported Keith through his relapses, encouraged him through challenges, and stood by him during tough years. But now she was dealing with emotional pain that felt deeper and more personal. The more the rumors spread, the more their communication suffered. Their marriage slowly began to break apart, not because of one single issue, but because of years of stress, loneliness, misunderstandings, and the constant demands of life in the public eye. Despite their love, they reached a point where they could no longer hold things together the way they once had. The announcement of their separation shocked the world. Fans had believed their marriage was unshakable, the rare Hollywood love story that would last forever. When the news broke, the internet reacted immediately. Comments poured in from every direction. Some people attacked Keith, some blamed Nicole. Many people, without knowing either of them personally, felt the need to make harsh judgments. The reaction was loud, unforgiving, and often cruel. Social media became a place where strangers analyzed their marriage as if it were a movie plot. The noise was overwhelming and left both Keith and Nicole surrounded by opinions they never asked for. Just as the world was processing their separation, another storm began forming. Keith accepted a performance at Mar-a-Lago, a private event hosted by an Australian billionaire. In his mind, it was simply another gig. He had not planned for political meaning to be attached to it, but the public didn't see it that way. Within hours, people online began accusing him of choosing a political side. They debated his intentions, criticized him, and questioned his values. Many people forgot that musicians often perform at private events without attaching themselves to the host's beliefs. The performance quickly became a symbol, even though for Keith it had been nothing more than work. The controversy grew even more intense because of one song he chose to perform, Pink Pony Club. It is a song about a young queer woman finding acceptance in a place where she finally feels like she belongs. To Keith, the song connected deeply with his own experiences of wanting to find a place where he fit in. He had said before that the song touched him because of its message of acceptance and freedom. But the public ignored that. They saw it as some type of provocation, a strange choice for a conservative audience, or a way to make a statement he never intended to make. People online argued about it for days, turning his performance into a subject of political debate. The social media reaction was explosive. Some mocked the situation, calling it ironic. Others accused him of hypocrisy. Many used it as another reason to attack him after the news of his separation. Keith watched as people who once praised him now reacted with anger or confusion. It seemed like no matter what he did, someone twisted it into something negative. He felt emotionally exhausted, as if the world was building an image of him that did not match who he really was. When the night of the CMA Awards finally arrived, Keith knew that he was walking into a room full of people who had read every rumor, every headline, and every harsh comment. He stepped onto the stage carrying far more than a guitar. He carried the weight of recent heartbreak, public judgment, and the confusion caused by the Mar-a-Lago performance. Every step he took reminded him that the world had been talking about him non-stop, often without understanding him at all. The audience watched him closely as he walked toward the microphone. As he began to play, the applause that greeted him felt different. It did not feel like a warm welcome. It felt more like a question. It was as if the audience was asking him who he was now after the divorce, after the rumors, after the controversies. He could feel the uncertainty in the room. People were not just listening to the music, they were looking for explanations, answers, or signs. The energy that usually lifted him on stage wasn't there. Instead, there was a quiet tension that made him feel exposed. Keith tried to focus on the performance because music had always been his safe place. But on this night, even music struggled to protect him from the judgment he felt. He knew that many people in the room were deciding what they thought of him even before he finished the first song. He carried the pain of the last months with him, and it showed in his eyes and in the way he held himself. This night was not a return to glory. It was a reminder of how quickly things can fall apart. But beneath the noise, beneath the headlines, beneath every rumor lies a truth Keith Urban never said aloud. And that truth would change everything. Keith Urban's life has always been shaped by a deep feeling of longing. He did not grow up with emotional security, and that early instability stayed with him. Even when he became famous, even when he stood on the biggest stages in the world, that old feeling never fully left. It followed him quietly, shaping how he thought, how he performed, and how he reacted to stress. For most people, longing is something that fades with age. For Keith, it became part of who he was. It showed up in the way he wrote songs, in the way he talked about his past, and in the way he tried to handle the pressures of fame. He always seemed to be searching for a place where he truly belonged, even when millions of people were cheering for him. There was a time when Keith said something that explained him better than any interview or article could. He said, "Music is where I go when nothing else makes sense." This was not just a nice quote or a casual line. It was the truth. Music was his escape as a child, his comfort as a teenager, and his identity as an adult. Whenever life became confusing or painful, he turned to music to steady himself. It was the one thing that did not judge him, did not leave him, and did not ask him to be perfect. Music was the only place where he felt completely himself. This is important when understanding why he performed Pink Pony Club at Mar-a-Lago. Many people saw the song choice as a political message or an attempt to shock the audience. But for Keith, it was something much simpler and much more personal. The song is about finding a place where you finally feel accepted and free. That message connected with him because he had spent most of his life trying to feel that way. When he sang it, he was not thinking about politics. He was thinking about identity. He was thinking about belonging. He was thinking about the emotional truth behind the lyrics and how they reflected parts of his own life. The public misunderstood his intention, but his choice came from the heart, not from strategy. When Keith returned to the CMA stage, he was not trying to return to fame. Fame had never been the thing that healed him. He came back because he needed to reconnect with the part of himself that had been lost in the chaos of the last months. Music had saved him before, and he hoped it could save him again. Stepping onto that stage was not an act of confidence, it was an act of survival. He needed to stand there, hold his guitar, and remind himself of who he was before the rumors, before the divorce, and before the judgment. He needed to return to the only place that ever felt like home. Inside Keith, there were two versions of himself. There was the boy who grew up in a difficult home, trying to stay quiet and invisible. He carried wounds from those years that never healed completely. Then there was the man the world saw the star, the award winner, the charming performer. The public loved the man on stage, but they didn't always understand the boy behind him. At the CMAs, both parts of him showed up. The man performed, but the boy was the one who hurt. That mixture made the moment feel heavier than anything he had experienced before. For Keith, music remained the final place where he felt whole. Even when everything else fell apart, music never abandoned him. It did not care about scandals or headlines. It did not ask for explanations. It simply accepted him. That connection was the real reason he walked back onto the stage. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone else. It was about proving to himself that he could still stand there and not break. The meaning of his comeback was not victory. It was survival. It was the act of a man who refused to disappear even when life tried to push him down. It showed that even someone admired by millions could still feel lost, still feel wounded, and still feel unsure of where they fit in the world. It reminded people that success does not erase pain, and that even the strongest hearts can struggle. Keith's story shows that legends bleed and icons falter. No matter how bright someone appears, they can still carry scars. But wounded hearts can still rise. They can still find strength in the things that helped them survive in the first place. For Keith, that strength was always in music. And as Keith Urban steps into the next chapter of his life, one shaped not by silence but by truth, the world waits to see what kind of man will emerge from the storm.